We are so happy, because we've had him 3 other times, to have David S. Harrison back with us. And he's a senior lecturer emeritus at the Evans School of Public Policy and Governance at the University of Washington. And he's here today to talk to us about current events in politics today. And first thing I would like to ask you about, David, is somebody asked me today, and what is a filibuster? And is a filibuster always in effect, or is it sometimes in effect?
So since Karen just asked, I'll start there, and then you'll hear me mention the same topic later. So I won't go into why into why I don't think the Democrats should eliminate it. But what the filibuster is a rule in the Senate, imposed by the Senate upon itself, that requires for most matters 60 votes to close debate. So it's long been used as a tool, depending on your viewpoint of it, either to block good things from happening or to block awful things from happening. But it's said to be one of the things that at one time in history created more across the aisle dealings in the Senate. So we use the filibuster to deny Republicans the 60 votes they needed to do a number of things when what's his name was president. And you can see that Mitch McConnell is an assiduous user of the same. They've fallen into rules where you don't actually have to stand on the floor and filibuster, that you can just refuse to close debate. And that's what's called a cloture vote. And if you don't get 60 votes, then you can't deal with something like H.R. 1, the For the People Act. So there are certain rules that the Senate has adopted that exempt certain things from the 60 vote requirement. Quite notably, federal judge appointments, first changed by Harry Reid when he was majority leader, then Supreme Court appointments that only need 50 votes, and then quite notably, budget reconciliation measures, where we just passed the $1.9 trillion bill, American Rescue Plan, with 50 votes, because there's a rule in the Senate that certain matters having to do with reconciling the overall budget are only require 50 votes. There are elaborate rules on what's in and what's out, and that's why the measure to expand the minimum wage was not included. So is that good enough for now, Karen? And then we'll go back.
Yes, I was with a group this morning, a Friday walking group, and I had a friend who said, I just can't get my head around this filibuster thing. He's a scientist, he's an environmentalist, not into politics at all, but he said, I just don't understand, why.
Have him call me and I'll chat with him about it.
Okay, and that's the reason why I asked you, because I think sometimes people, we forget from possibly, taking civics or whatever 40 years, 50 years ago.
Some of us were growing up in a major civil rights legislation of the 60s. All that talk about what Lyndon Johnson did with Southern senators was to get 60 votes, because otherwise the Southern senators were going to basically cause the Civil Rights Act of 63 not to be passed. So a lot of what Lyndon Johnson was doing there was he wasn't going for yes votes. He was going for votes to end debate so that he could get his 50 yes votes once debate was ended. So there's quite a history of it. But right now, liberals think it's an awful thing because, for instance, it would be a major impediment to doing everything on climate change that Joe Biden would like to do. So thank you for having me. This is session 4. We'll keep doing it as long as Reed and Karen want me to do it, and as long as you folks keep showing up. As I've noted at each session, I'm fully capable of talking about these matters in a neutral way, but you'll hear me talk about them as a liberal. And if you want to take exception to my viewpoints, I'm happy to have that. And I'm going to divide it into two. So if we're going to talk for a while about what's happening on the policy front, what is it that Joe Biden is doing? What we can think about that, and then we have to stop for a while, take some questions, and then and only then we'll go to the big lie and the big lie number 2 and 3 and 4, and what is happening politically, basically to make sure that we don't lose the Democrats don't lose the House and maybe get some more seats in the Senate in November of 2022. I would say that just because we're not reading down Trump's tweets doesn't mean he isn't out there, and the price of liberty remains eternal vigilance. And I think there's a lot among people who were obsessed with politics in October of 2020. There's a lot of letting down now, a lot of relief that people are getting vaccinated, that Biden and Harris seem to be on top of the COVID issue, that the American Rescue Plan was passed. And I think there's not an inconsiderable amount of weakening of the resilience and tenacity of the American voters. So hopefully that won't go on for much longer. I think the number one way to win elections is to do good things. I think Americans have mercurial sensibility on what good things are, but it's nice to know that the American Rescue Plan that has been passed, which is a huge bill, $1.9 trillion, is favored by 70% of Americans. And I think if you want your first thing out of the chute to be that favored, and as you remember, Obama, because of the Depression, had to do troubled asset recovery program, and he had to do a stimulus, and then he wanted to do the Affordable Care Act, and none of those was as popular as the American Rescue Plan. It's good to know it doesn't cost the government very much to borrow money, 2% or so, actually less than that for a 10-year bond. But it's also good to remember that we don't have that $1.9 trillion, and that we do have a significant deficit problem over time. That's why in his new proposal, the infrastructure plan, Biden is willing and in fact comfortable with raising taxes for corporations, and over time is comfortable with raising taxes for people making more than $400,000 a year. There's a couple things that are notable about the American Rescue Plan. There's a Republican talking point that only 9% has to do with COVID. That's a damnable lie. They know it's a lie. It's really embarrassing when people say things like that. That would be true if all COVID was delivering vaccines. Then 9% has to do with systems for delivering vaccines. But if you count in economic relief related to COVID and the hurt that is across America, then 85% of the American Rescue Plan is COVID related. There are some other things that were done. Rahm Emanuel, who used to work for Obama, said, "Never waste a good crisis." And there were some other things they put in the bill, basically because they could get Joe Manchin to agree with them, and they only needed 50 votes because of reconciliation. Monumentally, beyond stimulus payments to Americans and extension of unemployment insurance, is a mammoth investment in fighting child poverty. Some of you may have seen an article in Seattle Times that deserved an article on Patty Murray about 20 years of battling. And this has to do with a tax credit that is refundable for a child-based tax credit. That means somebody can get that that money whether or not their taxes are greater than that money, even though it's a tax credit, and an expansion of the earned income tax credit. So between the two of them, we could cut child poverty over the next 4 years in half, and that would be a wonderful thing. And the other thing that happened right away is Affordable Care Act repair and Medicaid repair. So all that chipping away that Trump and McConnell did on Affordable Care Act, they repaired a lot of that in this bill, including expanding Medicaid and paying for expanded Medicaid eligibility for the Affordable Care Act. So it's nothing but a good thing. It's important to remember that's not the only thing that's been happening under Biden-Harris. There's countless appointments of grown-ups to take jobs in that administration. And it's interesting because for all the grumbling we do about Mitch McConnell, all of it deserved by Mitch McConnell, in my view, it is true that there's been a tacit agreement with Senate Republican leadership that they're going to approve cabinet appointments and other senior appointments. They've only blocked a couple so far, and that's on purpose. They're letting Joe Biden have his team as a courtesy. There's also been a relentless amount of international diplomacy. Joe Biden's trying to host a fresh meeting on climate change separate from the Paris Accords. They've opened up the discussion with Iran, and of course they have an all-new NATO, where NATO now understands that we support NATO, so that's all a good thing. Now you read in this last week about Biden's $2 billion infrastructure bill. It's important to keep in mind that the classic definition of, 20 years ago, people weren't even running around using the word infrastructure, but the classic definition was really systems that move us from place to place and cover the underpinning of America: water, sewer, transportation, and so forth. And only about $700 billion of that money is highway, bridges, water systems, and so forth. Another $700 billion or so is expanded versions of the federal role of the infrastructure, Wi-Fi, electricity, grid, some school building and so forth, VA hospital building. And the last $600 billion is back to not wasting a good crisis. That is, you wouldn't find it in your average infrastructure bill. And so, as I said, Biden wants to increase the corporate tax rate from 21% to 27%, down from the initial 35% where it was when the Republicans did their bill. He wants to go halfway back, increase taxes on multinational corporations, and raise pretty much all that money from those sources. Republicans don't want any new taxes. And the good thing to remember, as Karen and I were talking about, is this too is subject to budget reconciliation. Before I get into that, the other $600 billion, $400 billion of it is to improve care and response to disabled Americans and senior citizens. So, one way we should like it, and another way, it's a leader of something that wouldn't necessarily belong in an infrastructure bill. Anything, and for something that could get disallowed under a rules challenge when they go to the Senate floor. So they'll go eventually to the Senate floor. The $64,000 question, $2 trillion question, is how Joe Manchin would vote from West Virginia, or Kristen Sinema from Arizona, and they both signal that they're for our big bill. So there'll be negotiations, definitely on the nature of taxes, but Joe Biden doesn't need 60 votes for this either. Most of it, if you couple of it with the tax increases, will be ruled germane as a part of budget reconciliation, and then they'll pass it with 50 votes, and it'll be the second plank of Joe Biden's deal. So that is all a good thing in my view. One more note then on reconciliation. So we've now established that we can use that 50-vote rule for the American Rescue Plan. Nancy Pelosi gets her bare majority in the House. It goes over to the Senate. They talk Joe Manchin into being the 50th vote. They make sure it's something that Nancy Pelosi can swallow. They both pass it by slim margins. Kamala Harris breaking the tie in the Senate, and we're good to go on two mammoth pieces of legislation. So it's a remarkable thing. It kind of stops there in terms of things that you could easily use reconciliation for. And one of the things you can't use it for is the For the People Act. We'll get a little bit into suppression in a minute, but basically the For the People Act is a way to get the feds more involved in protecting voting rights. And it would require 60 votes. And now that it's been advertised by us as what it is, the chances it would get 60 votes is zero. So you will get some activities in the various states to try and suppress voting again a bit. And I'll get to that after we stop this first segment. The reason why I don't think we should use the nuclear option and go to 50 votes on everything is that we may have fewer than 50 votes sometime in the future. The reason why Donald Trump did so much by executive order is that we could filibuster, and now we've been able to undo a lot of his executive orders, which are harder to undo when there are statutes. So it's like me getting out in a sailboat and going to across the passage to Kitsap County. If I got halfway across in the sailboat and I said, boy, that's a nice wind. This little electric motor I have to push my sailboat when there's no wind, I don't need that anymore. It's heavy. I'm throwing it over the side. I'll be fine. That's what the nuclear option is. The nuclear option, to be a good idea, depends upon us having more than 50 votes forever, or at least for a long time. And we don't even know if we're going to have 50 votes in November of 2022. It's craziness, I think. So what they're substituting is threats. And the biggest threat, and one that we might have 50 votes to do a rule change on, is a talking filibuster. So you can no longer just vote that you don't want to close debate. You have to stay there and filibuster. And Joe Manchin might vote for that, and that would make it harder to filibuster, and Republicans would be more choosy. So all this talk about nuclear option is just to try and make Mitch McConnell a little bit less of a jerk. So that's a hard challenge.
Yeah,
so let's stop there and take your questions and thoughts about the substance, and then we'll move on to voter suppression and politics.
If you have a question, raise your hand. The first, okay, let's see. Robin, what is your question? Unmute yourself.
I can read it. She's saying, how much do I predict the national debt will increase over the next few years? So back when the economy was a little bit better.
Or decrease with the tax cuts if they're passed.
Decrease.
Oh, okay.
So, either both of those, yeah.
Okay. So the tax the tax increases that Joe Biden is proposing are to pay for new spending. So say going into the pandemic, we were running a structural deficit of almost $1 trillion a year, maybe 800 billion. That's unfortunate because
what's a structural deficit compared to some other kind of deficit?
Okay, so so when I say structural deficit, I'm saying what would normally occur if you didn't change the tax law, and if the spending increase was roughly equal to inflation. Was not a mammoth spending increase. We were getting to the point where there was a deal between Republicans and Democrats that the Republicans could have increases in military spending if they didn't cut the safety net. So there were not mammoth cuts so there weren't any cuts to Social Security, and there were not mammoth cuts to the social safety net in the 4 years, and there were mammoth increases in military spending. So we got to the point where we were running deficits. I think Obama's last deficit might have been 500 billion or 400 billion, and then it eased up with Trump's tax cuts to almost $1 trillion without the pandemic. So it was at 21, 22 trillion, and now it's at 28 trillion. And the argument is that it's a bad deal to have it be equal to the gross national product in a single year. It's more complicated than that. As long as we're the world's favorite currency, that debt is underpinned by other countries. And in fact, it keeps China from getting too destructive with us because they hold our currency. The other thing, of course, is the debt service is lower because there isn't any inflation. But nonetheless, some of us feel that we need to be careful about this. Any effort that Biden makes to increase taxes will be swallowed by Biden's considerable agenda to spend money on climate change and the infrastructure plans. So what will decrease the deficit back to 800 million or $1 trillion, 800 billion or $1 trillion will just be, Biden thinks with the American Rescue Plan, the economy will start growing at 4% a year. So if that happens, 4 to 5% a year, and you increase corporate taxes 27%, all of a sudden your deficit's going to be like 500 billion or so, and you'll have at least made a little down payment, and you will have gotten that out of economic growth.
Thank you. That's one of the best explanations of all this complicated stuff I've heard. I appreciate it.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you.
That's why we keep having David back. I mean, I tell everybody, come and listen to this guy. He's really smart.
Well, many years ago, Robin gave me counsel on various things, so I'm happy to return the favor.
Yes.
Other questions?
Anybody else? Hey, boy. Oh, there we go. Hi. Okay, Jeffrey.
Hi. So it's a pretty simple question. The Economist magazine and other sort of businessy oriented magazines have sort of highlighted the potential for a huge spike in inflation, which seems pretty likely over the next 6 to 18 months. I'm not trained as an economist, so I'm trying to parse out how much of that is the Economist magazine trying to appear neutral and fair because they hated on Donald Trump a lot, so they might as well hate on Joe Biden also. And how much of that is like, I don't know, substantive or real? Like, obviously there will be inflation coming ahead, but the question is sort of how much.
It's a huge debate now, as you know, and interestingly, Larry Summers, who would have liked to have been, say, Secretary of the Treasury, a former president of Harvard and an economic advisor to Obama, is in the there will be serious inflation camp. And the person who's very much not in the there will be serious inflation camp is the Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, who with Powell, the Fed chairman, believe they have the tools to manage all those dollars that are out there. So as you know, it's a product of supply versus demand, and the inflation argument is this: there's so much borrowed money out there that supply won't catch up with demand post-pandemic, and that will drive prices up in unfortunate ways or beyond control. The Fed believes Sidney Powell, it's not Sidney Powell, what's Powell's first name? Sidney Powell is the maniac. Jerome Powell and Janet Yellen disagree with economists, so we're about to see who's right. They think they have tools in the Fed and the Treasury to control inflationary impulses.
Okay. Good answer. Hey, John Perkins, do you have a question?
No, well, it's more just I'd like to point out, I think that during the New Deal, the budget deficit increased by something like 50%. I mean, it was pretty huge, and we survived that pretty well. David, do you have any thoughts about how this time relates to that? And you know, there seem to be a lot of similarities, but yeah.
The data point I don't know is what that would have been as a percentage of GDP. Years ago, I spent 7 years in DC working for the state of Michigan, and I also ran a center for the Rust Belt. And our argument at that time was deficit spending is a great counter-cyclical tool for bad times. And that whole argument was based upon coming close to balancing the budget in good times. So I think it's entirely defensible that Joe Biden would want to. Joe Biden believes that the stimulus package that Obama got passed at the start of his term was too small. So that's why he went big. He had the votes and he went big, and I can see why. I think the issue is if we do get up to 4% or so GDP growth annually, how we can get Americans used to paying what they're buying for what they're buying. So I think this idea that we can spend money without without new taxes leaves us unprepared for the next time when we really, really, really need to borrow money. And so my problem with this borrowing is that we were unprepared for it, that we had that we had run huge deficits even before then. But the data point is how much of the GDP was Roosevelt spending. Of course, the GDP was going to hell at the time, so maybe the New Deal was 300% of GDP. I don't know. Other questions on the substance? We can go on to voter suppression before I lose you. Any final questions on the substance?
Nope. Looks like that's it. I think we can move on, David.
So let's talk about the rest of it. We're going to win 2 years from now because we're going to have done a great job, and Biden's popularity, his approval rating is over 60%. American Rescue Plan is 70%. I'm sure infrastructure will be +2. And obviously they have to figure out the border. It was hard to figure out the border before they took over, but they have to figure out the border. Obviously, they can't have that on the news every night as an unresolved matter. What the issue is, if we do lots of great things over the next 2 years, and if Biden holds up physically, remember, the man is, I'm not saying that this isn't youthful given my own age, but he's 78 years old. He needs to stop running up the stairs of airplanes. I think that's not a good idea. So at any rate, it'll be interesting because so far, partly because of the pandemic, I don't think Kamala Harris has found her way. I think too much time, 6 steps behind him with a mask on. And I think as the pandemic recedes, she's got to have more visibility. But I think what could do us in, I don't think anything's going to do us in, but if anything does us in its permutation of the big lie and its spawn, because now it's not just that really Trump did win, it's that he's demanding that candidates who get his endorsement say that he won. And so the lie is that he won. The other big lie, of course, is that the bills that are being introduced across America, including the Georgia bill, are responses to real election fraud, when of course they're not. So sometimes they'll say it's a response to the public's perception that there was fraud. Of course, they're the ones that are grading the perception. With no evidence, the evidence is to the contrary, that it was the cleanest election in our history. The third big lie is really awesome. And Trump said the other day that most of the insurrection on January 6th was hugging and free entrance into the Capitol. And the nice thing about the thing to say about that is 400 people have been arrested. There'll be plenty of evidence on the non-hugging that was going on, including the ultimate death of a police officer and an insurgent, and 2 police suicides. So we're going to have to do something about this right early and often. In my blog, which is called Our Unfinished Work, I reference the #1 center for you if you want to think about what's happening with voter fraud. Nobody else is close. This is the Brennan Center at the University of at NYU, brennancenter.org, and they'll send you free of cost a newsletter update on all these things. And they have a handy dancy updated chart of the things being introduced in all state legislatures. HR 1 is not going to pass. It's unfortunate that Joe Biden called it Jim Crow on steroids. That's just not true. I worked in the South in 1962, 63, back when blacks basically couldn't vote, and that was Jim Crow. This is what Stacey Abrams said, which is, this is Jim Crow with a suit and tie. It's nothing like the suppression we had in the past. Nonetheless, it's shameful because there is only one reason for the suppression, and that is Republicans can't figure out how they can win if they let people vote. So that's what's damnable about it. The For the People Act, HR 1, is not going to pass because it needs 60 votes for aforementioned reasons. So it falls to us to figure out how to keep this movement from succeeding. And there's a new bright and shining light, because Delta and Coca-Cola and American Airlines think that we're going to boycott them. Now, you could argue that both Delta and Coca-Cola made the bill in Georgia better, and that would be true. Nonetheless, and Stacey Abrams herself is not so sure a boycott's a good idea. But the way boycotts work is people, they emerge. And if you're running a big company, if even 5% of your demand goes away suddenly and goes somewhere else, that is not a good thing. Your profits are at the margin, and you have a lot of fixed costs, and you do not want 5% of your demand to go away. The one thing we've got going for us, American Airlines came out in Texas now with a statement. The #1 thing that we have is the normal supporters of Republican legislative leadership in this state are saying that they shouldn't do what they're doing. And in fact, the chair of Delta said it's all based on a big lie. We need companies to continue to say that. And then there'll be discussions like, should the All-Star game be in Georgia? And all of a sudden, 10 players will say it shouldn't be. And all of a sudden, we'll have a new black mark beside voter suppression. I do want to note that in many of the states that are battleground states, we have Democratic governors, and none of the things that the Brennan Center charts are as possible to happen are going to happen, because Democratic governors can veto in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Virginia, North Carolina, some other states. So we're protected there. I'm most worried about the states where we need to defend senators who just won, or we need to take back. So what will they do in Florida? They're already wanting to do something. Ohio, it's not clear that Mike DeWine's going to sign just anything, but we have a great chance to take back Rob Bortman's seat. We have a chance to, but we have to defend in both Arizona and Georgia. So whatever they do in Arizona and Georgia does matter. It is important to note that what they just passed is better than we had 6 years ago in Georgia. What we have had in Georgia is Stacey Abrams has changed the world, and there was a consent agreement with the court that allowed the absentees to flow, and so we're not we just need to stop all of this because there is only one reason for it. If there is a single case in America where a Republican legislator is fighting for election change and rules to defend against fraud, I don't know what it is. The last thing I'll say before we take another round of questions and I let you go home is, or stay at home, is I said in my blog, don't waste a good schism. And that's another don't waste issue. And there's a wonderful piece in Atlantic where Donald Trump makes the 4 candidates in Ohio, Republican candidates, sit together with him at a table and talk about how loyal they are. It's preposterous where the once allegedly moderate Republican Party chairman is basically bearing her soul to Donald Trump about how much she loves him. And the good news about this, of course, is if McConnell and Trump endorse different people, and if the candidate to the right wins, it opens up the center or even the center left. So you see John Fetterman already in Pennsylvania. He's already running. There's some other good candidates, but as some of you know, John Fetterman's the lieutenant governor and defended us ably during the recount. Tim Ryan, a longtime Democratic congressman, is running in Ohio. We're running very good candidates that give us a chance to go from 50 to 54 or 55. They're taunting Ron Johnson in Wisconsin, saying, come on down. And the leading candidate in Missouri right now is the man who resigned 2 years ago over sexual impropriety felony. So we're looking pretty good for 2 years from now. The thing to do, if any of you are involved in this, is to get back on various swing state targeting efforts that you've become fond of over time, and don't wait till next year. So questions, thoughts, insights on repression?
No insults, but I want to tell you that I was one of these people that said that I will never be politically active outside of my state. I will just, work on my own congressmen, senators, and local representatives. And it wasn't until 8 years ago I decided to change my attitude on that. And I worked with Indivisible and writing letters to people in other states, and especially Georgia. And I think that we made a difference. And I think that don't be afraid to work outside of your state. That's my opinion. This is just an opinion, not the senior center mayor. This just is Karen King. So, I think that we really do. We need to work everywhere. So
I think that proposition was proven by 81 million votes. Absolutely. And that's what it took. So sure, we'd like to go and doorbell or do things in state. It is unsatisfying just to win in our own states. We need to win in the country. And I think the calls and postcards and letters are a proven way to up the ante, as was the individual contributions. We used to get outspent constantly, and now we field candidates that have money. You look at Ossoff and Warnock, who, with Trump's help, won at the end. That was partly related also to the ability of people across the country to open up their checkbooks and really squeeze their checkbooks, look under the sofa and so forth. So I think it was all those things. I do think it's an old story now, but right after we lost 5 years, 4.5 years from now, the Democratic Party was in huge disarray, and Indivisible and then Swing Left and some of the others came along before the Democratic Party did and said, we can take back the House 2 years from now. And by God, we did. And that started a movement that lives on to this day. I am a little worried that the movement, in absence of Trump tweets is reducing. So if you're part of that movement, get back on
Yeah, Indivisible on Bainbridge is an amazing group. And if anybody wants to talk to me about it, please email me or get in contact because I'd love to talk.
It's a good choice. There's a lot of places where the league is fighting voter suppression. But Indivisible cells are an excellent choice.
Yes.
Oh, also, for those of you you're all from Western Washington, some of you have been involved in Common Purpose, which is David Domke's organization that also recruits and deploys people out of Seattle. It's
Common Purpose. Okay.
Common Purpose.
Thank you.
They have 600 or 800 volunteers that they deploy.
Yeah.
Including quite a few people on the island. Other questions about any matter, including suppression?
Sheila Kerwin.
Well, I have to ask a question of David. I mean, he would feel unhappy if I did not do that.
That's true.
Yes, he would. I have friends out in Wisconsin, having lived there for 20 some odd years, and asking about Ron Johnson, how they feel about him out there. And they don't think highly of him. They really don't. And he's saying, I think he is digging himself in deeper and deeper as the term goes on anyway.
Well, these senators vary. So you think you can name people who are, they're not Charlie Percy or Hugh Scott or Jacob Javits. They're a different stripe of Republican, but people like, John Thune or Roy Blunt from Missouri are attempting to be a part of a body that has 100 senators. Ron Johnson is not one of those people. Ron Johnson said that the bulk of the January 6th insurgents were Antifa who had bought MAGA hats. And Ron Johnson said that he would have been worried for his safety if it was Black Lives Matter insurgents, but he wasn't worried about people who were screaming, "Hang Mike Pence." So I don't know what Mike Pence feels about Ron Johnson not being worried. Anyway, Ron Johnson won, and he beat Herb Kohl and won in 2010 and 2016. And in 2016, he announced he was not running again. It should be interesting because we've got a very good shot at that race. He's a sour, poor excuse of a human being.
Yeah. So, let's see. Who do we have here? Maria. Maria, you can unmute yourself.
Got it. Any update on the census and how that is going to be recovered and affect the redistribution of districts and stuff? Anything?
So all the things that we sued about went away. So it was with the court ruling in the summer or fall, whenever it was. First, the court ruling about as you remember, there was a court ruling about the citizenship question, and then there was a court ruling about when they had to deliver the count. So nothing that Trump tried to do stands. I don't know when they're going to deliver the numbers, but all the biggest worry was that they were not going to count. The law says, the Constitution says you count everybody. And then Trump was trying to figure out a way not to count undocumented. And that's all going away. So that's good. The bad news is we didn't win back state legislatures. So we have some of the same forces in play in 2020 as we did 2010. And the court has not found a way to really decide which gerrymandering is okay and which isn't. So to me, I'd be for any state like they just did it in Michigan a bit and Maine, where we introduce a citizen initiative basically to take over redistricting, because the record in Washington state is Democrats, when they're in power, do the same things that Republicans do. They horse trade. We have a commission, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, one that the 4 of them name, and they figure out how to make everything a safe seat. In the olden days, there were 80 or 100 House seats that were swing seats, and now there are 40 or 50, and that's because both parties want safe seats. So that's how we got Denny Heck and now Marilyn Strickland and Susan DelBene, because they traded off those safe seats so Republicans could get more Republicans into Reichert's seat. Bad news for them, because then Reichert retired and Kim Schreier won. So their trade didn't work. But my point is, don't depend upon the parties to redistrict. But in terms of, and answer your question, everything that we were almost everything that we were worried about in terms of the political management of the census by Trump has now gone away.
Okay. Well, Barbara Golden had a comment. The saddest note of Ron Johnson is the loss of Russ Feingold's reasoned independence.
And I said Herb Kohl, that was wrong. He beat Feingold in 2010 and 2016, a strong, articulate liberal voice. And to this day, you know, we got 81 million votes, but we didn't win Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania by all that much. And we have to fight fiercely in those states and then try and get back to where we used to be in Ohio. So we're just happy that Ron Johnson's a jerk, because moderates, you know, independents and moderates notice those things.
Mm-hmm.
We know we're talking, a lot of us are Democrats, but in Wisconsin, you know, the next senator will be named by independent voters.
True. Yeah. Megan, you were next up.
Hi, David. Thank you so much for this presentation. I wanted to hear your thoughts about reinventing the Republican Party and what their principles will stand for. It's been pretty embarrassing with all of the behavior that's been happening in the last 4 years with voter suppression and MAGA hats and the riot in itself. And I'm just wondering what will make the Republican Party look good again?
It's interesting because in 1979, I went to work for the Republican governor of Michigan, Bill Milliken, for 3 years. He was George Romney's successor and a leading environmentalist and an ardent defender of the right to choose. He got the Margaret Sanger Award when I worked for him. The idea that a Republican governor could get the Margaret Sanger Award is, and as you know, in Washington, the founder of most environmental policy in Washington State was Dan Evans. So the party's changed, and the first stage of change is when Reagan won, those state organizations turned over, and they were enemies of moderate Republican governors. And so there still are, you know, Larry Hogan, there's still the governor of Vermont. There still is occasional true moderate Republican governor, but for the most part, the party itself, the underlying, you see party chastising members who voted for impeachment and so forth. The party has changed, and I don't know where they can go. There's 6 or so parties. Fiscal conservative Republicans, the old line, fiscal prudence. Trump didn't represent them, but they didn't feel like they could go anyplace else. And I don't think there's going to be 3 parties because the rules are against it. It's very disadvantageous to start a 3rd party. That's why they don't succeed. I guess I would think the person who could win the primary, who could most articulate some kind of version of what Republicans stand for, would be Nikki Haley, because she's already chastised Trump for January 6th, but she executed his foreign policy and she's run a state. So maybe you'll get a candidate who has the ability to articulate a position that has some coherence, I think that's more likely to come from a governor than a senator, because when they're senators, they have to genuflect the Trump forces on a daily basis.
Yeah, it seems like they're still doing it. It's amazing.
Oh yeah, he's got them. And that's because if you want to be elected to something, you don't dismiss like 30% of your voters out of hand. It's scarier to them to lose their right than it is to lose the center. So they'll try and win the primary by tacking to the right, and then they'll try and pretend that they're in the center.
Right.
But what defeats that is Trump being their advocate. So if you're David Perdue and what's her name? Come on, woman senator from Georgia. If you're the
Loeffler.
Yeah, Kelly Loeffler,
Oh, yeah.
you're saying, "Oh, I'm sorry." I mean, he made it impossible for them to win. With everything we did and everything Stacey Abrams did, we were still in trouble if it weren't for Trump's help. So that's what they worry about. They tack toward the right, and then Trump won't let them back to pretend that on any issue that they're moderates. It's an awful time to be a Republican.
Yeah. Hey, Tom, do you have a question?
Yeah, question, a comment. A comment is there are more people that, identify as independents throughout the country than either Democrats or Republicans. And, when you talk, I've thought about this back in the day when I was still in Ohio, but I thought if anybody could, organize and capture that vote, that would be significant. And one way, it would become more doable now that you have the problem with the Republicans. What are they going to do? I mean, you'd have to, but that's another story. Anyway, my question is with Trump, what do you think the chances are of him actually, getting convicted and possibly sentenced in the near future? So that could affect some upcoming elections.
Yeah, I don't know how much it will, but I think the chances are pretty good. So I think Joe Biden won. Obviously, he won a large percentage of the independent vote, and that he can do that again. But he's going to be 82. So the issue is who else could among our field. They're going to call us socialists and all that. The whole thing about being socialist is that voters don't believe that Joe Biden is a socialist. So David Domke, who runs Common Purpose, said Joe Biden had two things that Americans wanted extra much this time: experience and empathy. And so that's how we got the independent votes. We don't have them permanently, and we have to have an agenda that the American, you're from Ohio and I'm from Michigan, so we both know that whether or not the Democratic message shows commitment to the working man is Michigan and woman, and Michigan and Ohio aren't sure that it does. And Joe Biden's taking care of that, and it's just got to be taken care of on a regular basis. Pennsylvania too. So I think that's where we stand with independents. Remember, when you see all these numbers about how much percentage of Republicans support Trump, that's of a declining number. The registered Republicans are way down, 6 or 8% down. So that's good. Yeah. We have to have an agenda as Democrats. Our social agenda is just, and we have to continue it, and we have to remember that it's not our only part of our agenda, because we'll lose those states on social issues.
Yeah. And they sure are driving the social issues. Yeah. They sure are driving those social issues right now, from Mr. Potato Head to.
Well, I think right now cancel culture just doesn't resonate with people. I don't think people get up in the morning and read City, Michigan and say, damn those people doing cancel culture. I don't think they're worried about statues. I think they're worried about whether Joe Biden cares about their livelihood.
Exactly.
And that's his bet with the rescue plan and the infrastructure plan.
Yep.
Oh, and they care about people not killing them with a disease. So
Yeah,
I
that's a
think
big deal.
we come out of the COVID by, say, late summer, it's going to help a lot.
Yeah. Hey, Robin, do you have another question? Oh, okay. Yeah.
I have to, wait a second. I have to go.
Okay.
Can you
This
hear
will
me?
be on videotape,
Yeah,
so
we
you
can
can
hear you.
watch it on YouTube. So,
What? Oh, anyway, I have to go to a meeting in Paulsboro at 1, so I'm leaving.
okay.
See you, Robin. Good
Bye-bye.
to see you. Bye.
Megan, did you have another question?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one, but it lodges itself in my brain, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on it, which is that it was frankly surprising to me that there was such a divide between mask wearers and anti-mask wearers in terms of whether you're anti-government or not. And I wonder if you think that in the next, say, 10 years, journalists start reporting that Republicans who happen to not wear masks start to die off. Is
Yeah, I
it
think
going to be a like a minority, and so many Democrats are still alive and not too many Republicans?
Not fast enough.
The data's not going to do that for you. So 500,000 people have died. 300,000 or so of those are over 70. So you're not getting a die-off of a large die-off of, and that's not all Republicans who are dying. The data's not going to do that. But I think it is strange that it divided this way. I think it didn't have to. I think if Trump said, do this for me for 3 months and we'll get the economy open again, I think Deborah Birx is right. The first 100,000 deaths hit us like a sledgehammer. And from then on, we were in control of our destiny. And Trump loved the economic growth so much he could not bear to have mass slow it down. And if he had gone with the plan, he might be president. Who knows? But anyway, in answer to your question, the data is not going to perform in the way that you suggested.
Yeah. Tom, do you have another question?
I wonder, David, I'm 83. Trump, there's no way Trump is going to run again when he's 82.
I didn't answer the felony question, did I?
But anyway, the other point is, what about Kamala? I think she'd be a good candidate, but she's got to be, just like you said, she's got to get out there and be
Who's
more.
that?
Kamala Harris, the vice president.
Yeah. I think
About her
right now, if you're Cory Booker or any of a number of other potential candidates, you think that it's hers to win. And I'm just saying, we'll see post-pandemic if that's the way it emerges. Joe Biden says he intends to run again, but he's not going to. He's just trying to, there's no chance he's going to run again. So I think the favorite right now is Kamala Harris. I like Kamala Harris. I'm just saying she's got to build her reputation, or otherwise, Joe Biden had the virtue of not being paintable as what Republicans always say we are, and Kamala is paintable. Nothing wrong with that. She's a good American. I'm just saying she has that danger. In terms of, I'll let you go, but in terms of Trump being convicted of something, there's the number one chance of that, for those who follow the Manhattan district, is the tax fraud stuff that Cyrus Vance is working on. Also to watch is his calls into Georgia as possible election fraud. There's some things by the Secretary of State, by the Attorney General of the state of New York, that are less likely to generate that. So your number one charges being brought, arraignment right now would be now that they have all the tax files, would be claims in New York having to do with false statements on his basically overvaluing his real estate to borrow money and undervaluing it for purposes of taxation.
Yeah. Well, David, we've kind of run out of time, but would you come back and see us again next month?
I'd be glad to.
Oh, great. So we'll get something set up. I know you are just one of our best guests, and we just really love to hear what you say. So
Okay. Well, let's do it again. I hope for good news.